In today's video, we are going to be previewing the NFC South. Subscribe and like the video if you do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. So how we're going to do this is we are going to begin by talking about each individual team. We're going to start from the bottom and work our way to the top. Then we're going to talk about the division dynamics and what the future of the division is looking like. And then at the very end, we're going to go ahead and talk about who's going to win the division in 2025 and in what order. With that said, we are going to begin with talking about each team, beginning with the New Orleans Saints, who technically did come in last place, although they did tie with the Carolina Panthers. They had a 5-12 record. Obviously, the season started off incredible. They looked awesome versus Dallas and I think Carolina as well. And then everything just kind of fell apart. They went on a massive losing streak and injuries piled up. You know, Derek Carr and all that stuff happened. And they entered this offseason with a lot of questions. Now, if you guys have been watching my channel or, knowing me for the past couple years, then you would know that I have been very frustrated with this Saints team over the course of really ever since Breeze has retired. I have wanted the Saints team to try and just completely take down the roster and completely rebuild. Get rid of the quarterbacks, get rid of all your star players, trade them all away, acquire assets, and commit to a full rebuild. But that's not really the approach the Saints have taken the past few years. They've tried to remain competitive, and unfortunately and frankly, it just has not worked out for them. But I do want to applaud them for this offseason because I do think they went into this offseason with the mindset of let's rebuild, especially once the Derek Carr stuff kind of took into action where he ended up retiring. It kind of did signal that a new change was coming to the Saints. You bring in a new head coach in Kellen Moore, and I want to say this, I'm not the biggest Kellen Moore guy. I just am not the biggest fan of him. We'll see if he can work out in New Orleans. I hope he can. And then they also, of course, get a new quarterback in Tyler Shock. Listen, I'm also not the biggest fan of Tyler Shock, but I'm not a GM. I'm not watching every single small, practice session. I'm sure they know more about Shock than I do. What I'll say about Shock is I think he has a good arm. I think he has a good size, but fifth-year senior, he's an older player with multiple years of injuries. He's very inconsistent with the occasional just boneheaded play. And for me, if you are going to be an older rookie, still having some of those flaws to your game, to me, are just kind of some red flags. He is in a quarterback battle with Spencer Rattler, although I do think ultimately he will win that battle because they have a bigger investment in him. But one thing I will say about this Saints team is this is not a bad team. They're a rebuilding team, and they're clearly more focused on bringing in youth and younger players. But frankly, when you actually look at the depth chart, it's really not a bad team. Like, they're not going to win a lot of games next year because they have a rookie quarterback, but it's not a terrible team. A young offensive line with first-round pick Calvin Banks, first-round pick Talis Fuanga. We'll see what Trevor Penning can look like, but you do have Eric McCoy and Cesar Ruiz. Very young units. If your receiving core can stay healthy, I think you have some good guys here. Of course, Alvin Kamara is Alvin Kamara. Defensively, you're not going to have a bunch of great pass rushers, but you can occasionally get to the quarterback. I think your secondary is okay. You have the two veteran safeties, which is really good with some younger corners. I think another corner would be nice to add. As I mentioned, it's a rebuilding team. They're clearly not going to be winning the division this year. I would be stunned if they somehow make the playoffs. But I think for a team that is rebuilding, there's a lot to kind of work with here. You do have some younger guys. You're going to have to replace some of the veterans eventually, but I don't think this is going to be a typical rebuild that's going to take, 4, 5, 6 years to get the job done. This Saints team very well could end up being competitive within like the next 2 or 3 years if they really work their off seasons correctly. If Shock is the guy, let's just pretend that Shock works out and is like a top 15-ish level quarterback. Then if they can find a way to kind of build around him and, these next couple off seasons, I think they actually have a nice little foundation to work with. So are the Saints going to win the division? No, I don't think so, but I do think they'll be quite the competitive team. Next, let's talk about the Carolina Panthers. This was a weird season last year. I mean, a lot of lows, but then to end the year off, there was a lot more highs to build off of. And in this offseason, it did feel like this team kind of ride the wave of momentum from the last few weeks of the season into the offseason, where I thought yet again for the second straight year, they had a very productive offseason. Let's have the Bryce Young conversation first. First year, terrible. First half of last year, honestly, even worse. Second half of last year, pretty darn impressive. He was not perfect. He made mistakes. He had some bad games. But, obviously the flashes were there. He made enough plays to keep them competitive. And, that's what you're hoping you get more of this upcoming season, plus some more. To me, there really is not an excuse for Bryce Young. I mean, in terms of the players around him, he's got a new wide receiver in Ted McMillan. You have Xavier Legette. They've just invested 2 first-round picks in wide receivers. You have Jalen Coker. You have Adam Thielen. You have some other guys down there as well. Your running backs are pretty good. Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowell, Trevor Etienne as well. Rico Dowell had 1,000 rushing yards last year, and he's your RB2, so that's pretty cool. Your offensive line is pretty good. You got some young tight ends, and you got a great offensive head coach. So there's really no excuse for Bryce Young. This is the make or break year for his career. If he has a great year, then awesome. The Panthers Panthers have their franchise guy. But if Bryce goes out there and he stinks it up again like he did last year to start the year off, then I think the Panthers would be probably wise to start looking at other options at quarterback. Now, I don't think they should necessarily bench Bryce. I do believe they should try to make the Bryce situation work as much as possible. I'm not saying give up on Bryce or anything like that. I want Bryce to work out. I think Bryce should start the full season, whether he's trash or incredible. If he's, the worst quarterback in the NFL, that's fine. Like, let him figure it out. And if he figures it out by the end of season, then okay, we're feeling pretty good about ourselves. But if he doesn't, then that's fine too. Well, I shouldn't say it. It's not fine. It would suck, but you just find your future quarterback at that stage. The offense is really talented. And when you look at the defense, there's more capable bodies than what there was last year. I still don't think this will be a good defense, but I think it'll be a lot better than what it was last year. Let's start this out. The biggest addition was not from free agency or not from the draft. It was just Derrick Brown being healthy. Derrick Brown last year, when he was out for the entire season, man, that defensive line went from not good to god awful after Derrick Brown left. Like, he was just such an influential part of that defensive line, stuffing the run, getting to the quarterback. Without him, that defensive line just had nobody. This year, though, you do add Derrick Brown back into the mix. You had a Tershawn Horton who can get to the quarterback. Bobby Brown's decent against the run. Nick Scorton in the draft, I was a big fan of. Jay Wanham can get to the quarterback. I think this will be a pretty, formidable defensive line. It's not like top 10 or top 15 defensive lines, but it'll be like, I don't know, the 24th or 23rd best, which is better than the 32nd best like it was last year. Pair that with some upgrades, hopefully from Trevin Wallace, if he can step into a nice role. Secondary, you add in a Trevon Moehrig. Also, a Lathan Ransom can get some playing time too. This will be a better defense. This was probably the worst or second or third worst defense in the NFL last year. The only way really from this unit is just to keep getting better. And I think it'll be like the 23rd or 24th best defense, which is not great, but it'll be better from what it was last year. And if you assume the offense takes a step forward as well, then you can assume the Panthers can take a step forward. They were 5-12 last year. I think they can maybe end the season with a maximum of 8 or 9 wins, which would be a positive step in the right direction. Of course, I'm assuming that Bryce Young doesn't take like a huge MVP, leap forward. I'm not going to assume that. Next, let's go ahead and talk about the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the Falcons are one of those teams that I think will be sneaky good this year. I don't think a lot of people are really respecting the fact that they actually have a decent little squad to them. Especially when I'm looking around, I'm looking at predictions, I'm looking at videos of people talking about underrated teams. I just don't feel like I'm getting a lot of buzz from the Falcons, but I actually think this Falcons team could be pretty damn good next year. Let's get it out the way. Offensively, you're essentially running back the exact same team, but you lose your center. You get a new quarterback with Michael Penix, who's now going to be the full-time guy. It's the same offense. You're just obviously praying that Michael Penix Jr. works out. And frankly, he looked pretty darn good in the short amount of time we saw him last year. So I do think he'll be okay. He's got a good surrounding cast around him. Solid offensive line. We'll see what that center position looks like, but solid offensive line. Let's see what Kyle Pitts can do. Darnell Mooney, Drake London, Bijan, Tyler Algier. There's a decent enough supporting cast around Penix to have a top 15 offense next year. And defensively, their biggest weakness was the fact they just had no pass rushers, nobody who could consistently get to the quarterback. And even though they kind of found their footing late in the season when it came to getting to the quarterback, this year, I think they actually have some genuine dudes who can get after the quarterback. They're all a little bit younger, especially like a Jalen Walker, James Pierce Jr., like those guys. Those are younger players, but those dudes have some juice to them. And you have a package of both those guys coming off the edge that could be deadly, because those dudes are freak athletes. Also added in a Leonard Floyd, who has been a productive guy in the past. You get more development from Rook, from Braylon Trice, Brandon Dorlus, and so on and so forth. You pair that with a secondary that was okay last year, with AJ Terrell being really good, Mike Hughes, DeAlford, Jesse Bates. It's a decent enough, not to mention Xavier Watts, who probably will start for them next year, or at least gets a lot of playing time. It'll be a better defense for sure, especially if those younger guys really do pan out. Again, I'm not going to predict that they're going to make the playoffs, but if you tell me the Falcons are a double-digit win team next year, honestly, I wouldn't necessarily be too surprised. I'd be happy, but I wouldn't necessarily be like, whoa, that's crazy. Interesting. Good to know. And then lastly, the division winner, the 10-7 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Look, I really like this Buccaneers team. There's a lot to like on this roster. And in this offseason, I thought they did a fine job of addressing some of their issues. I still do think linebacker will be a bit of a weak spot for them. I don't really know if they have anybody who I trust full-time there. But their biggest weakness defensively last year was in part, cornerback. But this year, they add in a Benjamin Morrison and a Jacob Parrish. You can now move around some different pieces in the secondary. You got a bunch of versatility back there, so that'll be really interesting. You bring in Hassan Reddick. You're hoping for Chris Boswell to really develop as a pass rusher, so you're hoping you can get to the quarterback off the edge a little bit better. Offensively, this was a top 10 offense, and in fact, it was probably like a top 5 offense last year. Obviously, Chris Godwin's dealing with the injury, but Emeka is like the perfect guy to step in there and get the job done for now. And then when Chris does come back, Emeka can move to that third role, and you're going to have 3 really tough covers out there. With the offensive line getting better, hopefully the Tristan Wirfs injury is not too severe, and he can come back mid-season or so and really help this offensive line out. You have Baker Mayfield, who hopefully can limit some of the turnovers. He did have a lot of turnovers last year, but still played really good last year. Bucky Irving gets the full-time nod next year. This is going to be a really good offense, assuming they don't take a step back after Liam Cohen left. And I have a feeling this entire team has a pretty good shot of winning the division. Let's talk about the dynamics and the future of this division. This is a really interesting division when you just kind of take a step back, because on paper, this division's not very good. In fact, I think it's I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's the worst division in the NFL. I recently did a video talking about the worst divisions in the NFL, and I think the NFC South might have been the worst or one of the worst. But the nice thing about that is when you do have a bad division, it's typically because the teams are super young and developing and rebuilding, and that's kind of the case for this division. Like when you look at the quarterbacks, obviously Baker Mayfield's a bit of a vet at this point. Penix is now in his 2nd year. Shock is a rookie, and Bryce Young's now in his 3rd year. So that's 3 super young developing quarterbacks. And you look at the rosters around him, those are rosters that have a lot of younger pieces. Atlanta has a bunch of them, like Bijan, Drake, Jalen Walker, James Pierce Jr., all the dudes in the backfield. Like there's a lot of different guys there in Atlanta that are, 27 and younger, which is really good for the period of time they want to be competing in for the next couple of years. And then Carolina, kind of the same story. Yes, you got some veterans in there like an Adam Thielen, but you're pairing up with Bryce Young, a Tet McMillan, a Jalen Coker. You had Xavier Leggett, an offensive line with Ike Ekwonu, multiple young pieces defensively. Same with the New Orleans Saints. That whole offensive line is like super young dudes, young quarterback. Yeah, you got some vets around them, but I think this division's actually looking pretty good. Now, I'll say this, I think Tampa Bay is probably the favorites to win it, and I'm not really expecting too much movement within this division. Again, we're assuming that no injuries are gonna happen this year. Let's just turn injuries off. It doesn't happen. There's no injuries. Of course, there will be injuries, but let's just assume for the sake of the video, every team stays fully healthy, or at least the main group of guys stay healthy. I look at this and I say right now, Tampa Bay is the favorite to win the division, and I think that's the rightful, choice, because I think they are the most talented team. I think Atlanta has a second best chance because I think they are a nice young team with a good quarterback that, if he can develop nicely this offseason, could take that step forward to getting to double-digit wins. Carolina has a long shot to win the division. They're going to need that defense to step up big time. In fact, I actually kind of feel arguably a little bit more comfortable banking on New Orleans to be better, just because they have a lot of like older-ish players that are still really good, like Justin Reed, a Tyrann Mathieu, a Demario Davis, a bunch of dudes on the defensive line that are older, like a Chase Young, Cam Jordan, Devon Godshaw, so on and so forth. On the offense, Chris Olave's kind of an older guy. Hopefully he can stay healthy. Alvin Kamara, Jawan Johnson. Like there's more veteran proven players in New Orleans. If we just assume Shock is okay next year, that team will probably be better. But I could see a team like Carolina potentially having a chance to go in and, maybe make some noise this year. Again, I think this is an improving division with not a lot of movement I'm expecting this upcoming season. I think, it'll be interesting to see what this division looks like 2 to 3 years down the road, because frankly, it's kind of an unpredictable division. It's easy to predict this division like next year and even heading into like 2 years after this year. But we start talking about 3, 4, 5 years down the line, who's going to win the division. I kind of think it's a toss-up. I actually genuinely have no clue. If you ask me, hey, who's going to win the NFC East in 3 to 4 years? I'll probably say, well, probably Philadelphia or maybe the Washington Commanders. It'll be one of those 2 teams. When I look at the South, I'm like, I don't know who's going to win this division 4 or 5 years down the road. Maybe Atlanta is the top dog in the division. Maybe Bryce develops and he's really good. Maybe the Saints get some good play from Shock and all of a sudden they're cooking with, oil and stuff. And maybe Tampa Bay takes a step back, or maybe they elevate to getting to that next level. I truly do not know what to expect from this division multiple years down the road. So this will be a fun division, but let's go in and predict what will happen in 2025. Let's begin. Who comes in 4th place? In 4th place, I have the Carolina Panthers. Now, for this section, I'm not going to give you a specific game they're going to win, because later in the offseason, I will be doing a full-on regular season predictions, playoff predictions, Super Bowl predictions. We'll do all that here in a few weeks, so keep an eye out for that. For now, I'm just going to kind of give you a range of how many wins I'm expecting from each team. For the Panthers, I do expect them to come 4th in the division. Now, it's not because I think Bryce is going to be a bad player by no stretch. It's just that they are a really young team that's going to make some mistakes. they'll be competitive. If Bryce, comes out of nowhere, plays fantastic, then they'll probably end up being higher than 4th. But I'm just not expecting them to take that big of a step forward quite yet. I think they will take a step forward, but not a huge step forward, because ultimately I just have a hard time trusting a lot of these younger players when there's a lot of unprovenness to this roster. So I think they're going to win more than 5 games. My prediction right now is somewhere between 6 to 9 games next year. I know that's kind of a broader range, but 6 would be like Bryce plays better, but the team is just not very good around him quite yet. 9 is like Bryce took a huge step forward, the defense took a step forward, and we are pumped for what's going to happen in future years. If I were to guess, I'd say probably like 7 or 8's that sweet spot, so 6 to 9, somewhere around there. In 3rd, I do have the New Orleans Saints. Now, I'll say this. I think Carolina's future long-term could be better if Bryce works out. But I think the Saints, for the temporary time being, have more veterans to work with that I feel a bit more comfortable predicting them to win just like 1 or 2 more games more than Carolina. I'm going to say they're going to win, I'll kind of say the same range here, 6 to 9 games, but somehow they'll win 1 more than Carolina. Again, it's kind of, they're neck and neck. You could flip them. I don't really care too much about that. I do think the Saints will finish 3rd, though. I just have a little bit more faith in those guys because they're just a veteran unit. Like, there's a lot of vets on this team, a lot of older players that I know what I'm going to get from them. And from the guys, the younger guys, I already know what I'm going to get from them as well. All Shock has to do is go out there and not, screw it up. And I think they'll win a handful of games. I'm again saying that sweet spot between 7 to 8 games feels about right for the Saints. I think those two teams are really close. In 2nd, I am going to go with the Atlanta Falcons, and I think there's a lot to like here with the Atlanta Falcons and their roster. I truly do believe in Michael Penix Jr. I think him, Bijan, Drake. I think Pitts will have a nice bounce back year, solid offensive line. I think they'll be a really good offense, and I think defensively, because they can get after the quarterback a little bit more, that'll help them gain some advantages on the defensive side, so that way the secondary has a bit of an easier time next year. I think their range is somewhere between 9 to like 11 wins. I think the sweet spot is that 10 mark. I think that's probably what they're going to ultimately hit. 9 is Penix plays good, the defense takes a step forward, but they're not quite yet there. They need 1 more year to rebuild. 11 or 10 wins is like, okay, Penix took a nice big step forward in his 2nd year. The defense took a nice step forward. We're not quite contenders, but now we're pushing playoff territory from here on out. But at my number 1, I am going to stick with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think the Buccaneers just have the best roster. They're the most proven team. I know what their head coach looks like. I know what their quarterback situation looks like. I know what their defense looks like. They just feel like the safe bet right now. I think they'll win more than 10 games. They did only win 10 games last year. I think they'll be better this year. I don't really know why. It's just sort of this hunch in my stomach. I think 11 to 12 wins is probably their territory. I can't quite see 13, but I also can't see 10. I think it'll be 11 or 12, maybe 10, but I think it'll be enough to win the division, and I think they'll have a potent offense. I think defensively they'll take some steps forward, assuming, guys like Benjamin Morrison can stay healthy. They'll be competitive with every single team out there. They'll probably, mess around and screw up here and there because that's typically what happens sometimes, but I think they'll get the job done ultimately. So again, I think Panthers come in 4th, but they will be better. I think the Saints come in 3rd. Saints, Panthers, you can flip those either way. I think they'll probably win a very similar amount of games next year. Both teams will be better, though, than they were last year. Atlanta in 2nd place. I think they take a step forward too. And Tampa Bay in 1st place. Not necessarily expecting a step forward, but I think they'll be slightly better. They'll be about the same as they were last year, but they might win 1 or 2 more games. But you let me know in the comment section below, how do you think this division will pan out? And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.